Hey guys, welcome to Sowing Seeds. My name's Christina and today we're starting seedlings. Okay, so the first thing that I like to do is to get organized because if I don't, then I will just have everything strewn everywhere. So first, let's talk about supplies. I like to have something to mix soil in. You'll need some seedling mix. This is very important because if your soil is too heavy, then the root system will not be able to develop and can choke out the seeds. So make sure you invest in this or mix your own. That can also be more cost effective. There's a few ways that you can start them off. You can do them in one of these hex trays, which I like to start with because that way I can see what germinates and what doesn't. And then when I pot them up, I can put it in a potting soil mix so that the seeds don't dry out too quickly. So I like to use the smaller trays for germination basically, and then I'll transfer them over. All right, let's get started. First, you're gonna wanna dampen the soil. Now, you don't want it to be sopping, but you want it to be evenly distributed and saturated throughout. So, because this stuff can be very, it won't absorb very well. So it's important to kind of get it pre-moistened and then just do little bits at a time. It's kind of like making mud pies as a kid, but cleaner. So I appreciate that. Okay, so this is what it should look like. Evenly distributed and ready to go into the seed cells. Some of these come in a break in half. Some of them come in like 6 cells, so it just depends on which ones you have, but I usually like to do half at a time, and I'll just fill her up. So once you've gotten it full, I actually go back in and just press in to make sure there's no air pockets. So I'll go in and just lightly tap it. You don't want to compact it, but you definitely want to make sure you don't have any air pockets, because if you do, when you go to water, then all the seedling mix will just sink down and then you won't have enough soil for your seedling. So that's what it'll look like, and I'll go ahead and do the next one. Okay, now that we have our seedling tray filled, the next important thing is to label first, because I don't know if it's just me, but I will get things mixed up and then mislabel things later. So I always try to make sure I'm organized on the front end, because that will make things easier on the back side. So different seeds will have different instructions as far as depth and timing. So I'll explain at the end how I organize my planting schedule. But for right now, these are what I have scheduled to get in some dirt. Basil seeds are smaller. Typically, the rule of thumb is you will go as deep as the size of the seed. So bigger seeds, you're gonna go deeper than smaller seeds. You would do like a surface sow. So basil seeds are on the smaller side. So what I'm gonna do is I just make a little tiny divot for them and do that all the way across. I typically like to put a few seeds in each, because there is an old saying, if you have one, you have none. If you have two, you have one. So not all seeds are going to germinate. And if I'm taking the time to plant them, I want to ensure that each cell is going to have at least one plant in it. I can always split them out if several cells didn't germinate, Or if I accidentally missed one and planted in one twice. We can always shift them around later. And I know a lot of people don't like it, but sometimes you can just pinch them off if you need to. It always makes me sad, but if you don't, then you could end up with several hundred extra plants that are difficult to take care of. I'm not saying I know that from experience, but I know that from experience. All right, then we're just gonna lightly cover them. And this is just to get the seed good contact with the soil, which is going to trigger the seed to germinate. It's very important that seeds stay damp or else they'll just dry out and do nothing. Some people that struggle with getting seedlings to germinate, that's a common issue, is letting the top of it dry out. With seedlings, I typically bottom water, but before germination, I will spray surface water them because that's going to ensure that the seed itself is staying moist and is encouraged to drop a root and grow tasty food. These hyssop seeds are also pretty tiny. They're about the same size as basil, if you can see. We are going to very carefully try not to mix these up, and I'm going to do the same thing. And there you have it. That's how you start seedlings. What I'm going to do, I'll probably plant these here in a little bit. I haven't decided what I'm gonna put there yet, but when I'm done, I'm gonna keep this cover on. And if I notice that it's getting too much moisture, I actually use these label markers to prop them up so that it can get some airflow and not get full of algae and mold, because that can happen sometimes. If you are experiencing green algae-like substance, there's a couple of ways that you can prevent that. One is you can sprinkle a little bit of cinnamon on there to neutralize it, or preemptively you can put vermiculite on top. And vermiculite just helps to control the moisture levels at the surface to where it's not optimal for algae to grow. If you experience any mold on your soil, the best way I have found to remedy that is to use peroxide, just regular 3% peroxide that you can get from the grocery store or wherever. And you just spray it on top, and that's going to kill off any of the mold. Let's talk about organization. Hold on a second. It's important to be caffeinated. Okay, so I've tried several different methods. This has been my favorite. And basically what I'll do is I'll make a planting schedule for the season, and I'll sit down, I'll get all of my seeds out, usually around December, January. I kind of start looking to see what I have on hand and figuring out what I need to order. Then I will go based off of the last frost date, which we are in zone 7A. So this year, our last frost date is April 12th. So I count back from there. If it says 4 to 6 weeks before last frost, then I mark that specific variety down in that week. Then I categorize them by weeks. I'll put them in separate baggies, and I'll just use a sticky note to write down what's being planted that week with the date. And then I put all of the seed packets in that pouch. And I've tried, I had like a big rectangular box and I had all my seeds in there, and it was just very chaotic for me. It was hard for me to have clear direction on what I was supposed to be working on. And so breaking it down into weekly packs has been a game changer. So I love this method. I highly recommend it. I'm pretty sure I saw it somewhere on the YouTubes, and I'm very appreciative of it because it has been a lifesaver when it comes to staying organized. The other thing that I like to do is to keep a journal, because sometimes I will forget what I did. So this is my gardening journal. And basically, whenever I do something, I just jot it down really quick. This is my first year doing this because I don't have the attention span for this sort of thing. But I have noticed that it's been helpful if I'm trying to remember what did I plant or what do I need to be doing, and not have to go to the plants and sift through whatever I've planted to figure it out. So this is a great at a glance, as long as I stay up on it and not forget to write it down. So we'll see how it goes. I'll let you know later. Some of the things that I have found helpful with starting from seed is, one, don't give up. My first year of starting from seed, I murdered every single last one of them. And had I stopped there, I would never be doing what I'm doing right now. So I'm very thankful for perseverance, because it can be very discouraging when you spend money on trying to get started. You buy your seeds, you buy your soil, you do all the things, and then nothing comes up. Instead, let it provoke you to find out the why. If we're curious about something, then that's going to produce something in us. We're going to be eager to figure it out. And I have found not giving up has been just such a blessing, because I'm very thankful for this skill that I have, and it started through failure. So if you are that person that is discouraged because you've tried in the past, try again and start small. Do one seedling tray. Don't try to do 5 or 10 at a time. Just start with the one, master it, master very few varieties, and then go from there. So that was, for me, it was a big deal to just keep going and not give up. And I'm thankful that I didn't. Another important thing is to know your timing. I have planted things too early, and then it was a nuisance to maintain them until the last frost date. So especially because I get excited in January, I'm sick of winter and I'm ready for spring. And I think maybe subconsciously I feel like if I start planting, then spring will come sooner. But that's just not how it works. And then next thing you know, I've got all these giant plants everywhere that are thirsting for water every 6 to 8 hours, because the roots are there's just too much for that cup. So pull the reins back and make sure your timing is right. Make sure you know your zone, because that's going to dictate when your last frost date is. For me, it's usually mid-April. And so these little baggies, sometimes the dates will change by a couple of days. And so I may scratch it off and make that adjustment, but for the most part, it's about the same every year. The other important thing to know is seedlings cannot dry out. If they dry out, they're toast. So it's very important to monitor them closely at the beginning until they sprout. Once they sprout, they actually do better to have those ebbs and flows of hydration and dryness, because when the cell dries out, that allows the root system to breathe, and that protects your roots from root rot. That's another reason why using seedling mix is important, because if the soil is too heavy on those tiny little roots, they can struggle a little bit more. So I want to create the most optimal environment for them, and so I'll start with the seedling mix. If you're wanting to start indoors, then I've actually, instead of paying for grow lights because I'm cheap, I bought shop lights from, I think it was Home Depot. So they had these LED shop lights. I think they're 3-foot lights, and they were maybe $15 a piece. So each shelf, I have a rack similar to this one. Each shelf has 2 grow lights, and then I put the seedlings underneath, and they do just fine. Once they get established and they're out of the nursery NICU, then I take them outside to the greenhouse to continue growing there. So that helps me to be able to fit everything. The only downside is, like right now, it is, I think today was like 35 degrees. So last night I had to bring all the trays in. So that's not my favorite, but it works. The other important thing to know is, in my opinion, it's best to start with native varieties. So where we live, For instance, the Cherokee purple tomato is a native variety and grows really well here. It is pest resistant, disease resistant, because it knows this environment. And so Cherokee purples are a variety that I grow every single year, and they're very happy to grow in my garden. I have also bought varieties that were not from this region. I think it was the Amish paste tomato, and it did terrible. I think I might have gotten one tomato out of it. It was terrible. So in the next year, I went to go find another paste variety. And so I went to the Mennonite market nearby and I bought some of theirs, and those suckers thrived. I mean, each plant was it was a determinate variety. So each plant was about this tall and it was just loaded down with tomatoes. So it's not that you can't grow certain types of things, it's just that certain varieties grow better in different regions. Another thing you can do is find varieties that are from a different region but have similar climates, and they typically will do well. Amish paste could do well in my area. They just didn't do well for me. So I always try to stick with the more native varieties as my staple in the garden. And then sometimes I'll be adventurous and try something that is not necessarily from this region, but I'll throw it in the ground. I'm just not going to be dependent on it. So another thing that I think is important to mention is once your seedlings are nice and big and ready to go into the garden, if you've had them indoors and you set them outside or you put them straight into the garden, you're going to be really disappointed when you come out the next day and they're all just slumped over. And the reason for that is you have to put them through a process of hardening off. If they've only known the elements of the inside of a grow room, then they've never been exposed to wind or rain or sun, intense sunlight. So there's a process called hardening off. And what you do is you keep them in their little pots and you set them outside for a few hours and then you bring them back in. And the next day you set them out a little bit longer. And typically, I'd say within a week, they're nice and sturdy. But you want to make sure that they can handle the elements before you stick them in the garden because it may be overwhelming for them. Another thing that you can do is when you're growing indoors, you can keep an oscillating fan on them, and that fan is just going to keep those stems nice and strong. They're constantly working against the wind resistance, and so it's kind of like core strength for us. So make sure your seedlings go to the gym daily and make sure that you harden them off before you set them in the garden. Once you've hardened them off, then it's time to put them in the garden. I typically make sure I water them in really well the first week. And what that's going to do is to encourage the root system to develop down into the native soil. So you want those roots to anchor into the ground quickly. And then after that, my philosophy on it is unless we're dealing with a severe drought, I don't really water them because they are going to search deeper for water if you don't water them. I've noticed that my plants are stronger if I'm not watering them constantly, and I know it goes against certain philosophies of other gardeners, and mad respect to them. I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying in my experience, I have found that kind of sink or swim, if you can't cut it, you can't cut it. I grew plenty to make sure that even if I lose a couple, I'm still going to be okay. But I have just found that overall, when I water them less, they thrive more. They're able to bear down deeper roots, which allows them to access more nutrients. And if we have a dry week, they're still going to be okay. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And if you have any requests on something you'd like to learn, please put it in the comments below. I love talking all things plants. So anyways, love y'all. Bye.